Hi, everyone. Doc T here with another episode of the Horses Advocate podcast. Thank you for joining me. We're all here to learn about horses, and I promise you this podcast will give you some really cool insight as to why your horses are either overweight or underweight or not the perfect weight, and why you're struggling to try to get them to be better. But I wanted to address something that just came to me, a little thought that goes through my mind as I travel from farm to farm. I listen to podcasts, I listen to music, and sometimes I listen to books that are fiction. And there's a fictional book that I'm listening to about bad guys and good guys. And the bad guy is saying how lucky he is that we can disseminate disinformation via our free press and the First Amendment, that we have a press that can write whatever it wants. And we all have been through a lot these days since the pandemic of getting, having an increased effort in finding good information. And that good information we like based on where it's coming from. In other words, we have our camps, our troops, our tribe, our trusted sources that we believe. And I appreciate the fact that you guys are listening to me. Most of you are believing me because I have the credentials, I have the experience, and I'm not trying to sell you something. And I appreciate that. But on the other hand, there's a lot of misinformation out there. And it's really hard for you, the horse owner, to try and weed through that. And I just don't know how to work hard at this to make it more truthful or transparent. So in my effort to do so, I like to back all the way back to basic scientific principles and try to bring those principles together with the information that we have. And unfortunately, the amount of information that we have regarding horses that we would call scientific is minimal at best, suspect for certain, backed by biased results, biased by the people who are funding them, biased by the researchers who want to, who want to prove a point. And in all science, we all want to prove a point. Just to remind you all, the example I always talk about, which is, for a longest time, up until about 500 years ago, we thought that the sun circled the earth because it was so obvious. And I know you've heard this before from me, but I'll say it again for all you newbies out there. We thought that the sun circled the earth because it came up on one side, it went over the top of us and went down the other side. We call that east and west. And we were absolutely committed to it. Unfortunately, there are some smart guys out there who said, no, I don't think this makes sense. It doesn't explain the changes in time, the seasons, a lot of things. So with good calculations and good scientific study, we realized that the earth is circling the sun and the earth is actually rotating on an axis as we go around the sun. And that seemed to fit the bill scientifically as to what is correct. And yet you look at the moon and the moon is circling around the earth, but it doesn't rotate on an axis. So when you look at the moon, it's the same thing every time you see it. It never changes. So why does the moon not spin and the earth spins? Is that spin always the same? Is the tilt always the same? Is the orbit completely circular or is it elliptical? I mean, there's so many variable factors that we can't actually say that the astronomy is correct. But because it's happening relatively slowly, in other words, over billions of years, we can accommodate some of those changes. But in the moment, meaning second by second or year by year, it seems to hold true. And yeah, it still doesn't, because every 4 years, including this year, February adds an extra day. It's called a leap year because they had to do like you all do in your checkbooks, the error someplace, and you just fudge it because that brings it back to zero. So science is not accurate. That's what I'm trying to say. Science is very inaccurate, and there's a lot of fudge factors. And I'm trying to bring you the best information that I know, gleaned from so many different articles that I read or listen to that are based in humans, or if you allow me, a very specific animal that's a mammal that is not a horse, that is usually based on lab animals such as mice and rats and gerbils and hamsters and other things like that. And it makes it really difficult to actually understand that. So I'm looking over here at my notes because I have started something called energy balance. And before I dive into that, let me close out this section by saying I'm going to try and do the best I can to give you unbiased information. But be prepared. There are plenty of people out there, from my colleagues to the universities, to your local veterinarian, to your local bodyworks person, to your local farrier, to your local grain dealer, who will challenge me and say, what gives me the right to give this information to you? And all I can say is, as I go into my 70th year of life, 50 years with horses, 51 years with horses, I'm trying to give you what I know, what I see, what I've seen, and what makes sense to me, because I'm so sick and tired of horses who are being faced with their demise right in front of us. The question I have for each and every one of you is, how is what you're doing working for your horse? And maybe that should be my tagline, not just helping horses thrive in a human world, but and how's what you're doing working for your horses? And if they're working fine, then don't change it. But if you're finding that your horses are breaking down, or their hair coat doesn't look right, their hooves look bad, they're all getting Cushing's disease or insulin resistance, they're all obese, or they're underweight, or whatever is going on, be honest with yourself. And if it's not working for you, you're going to have to change it. And that's the purpose of the Horse's Advocate, is to help you find other routes that should work, that should help our horses. So with that in mind, I wanted to go over something called energy balance. And energy balance is based on the first law of thermodynamics. Now, before you start running, screaming out of the room, yes, I am going to touch on physics, but the first law of thermodynamics states, in a nutshell, that energy is neither created nor destroyed, but converted from one form to another. Okay? So let's put this in different terms. Calories in, calories out. Calories in, calories out has been around since I was a boy. I'll never forget, my parents had a book called Calories Count. And then they had another book called Calories Don't Count. And I wish I could find these books, because they were back in the 60s and they were still arguing it back then. But back then, they didn't even have all the information. And I've got to tell you, we don't have all the information today. The information that we have is better. It's making more and more sense, but we still don't have all the figures. So I wanted to go over this law of thermodynamics, calories in, calories out, in a way that might make sense to you, so you might be able to start to understand what's going on with your horse. And no, I'm not going to talk about humans, although there'll be some human examples. I'm not pointing fingers at any one of us. We're all doing our own journey. And it starts with this first law of thermodynamics. So if calories in equals calories out, it's like a bank statement. It's like your bank account, money in, money out. And you hope that you have as much money coming in as going out. Otherwise, if you have too much going out, you're not going to make it, right? You're going to be broke, bankrupt. And obviously, if you don't eat enough calories and you're consuming the calories, your body will quit and you'll die. That's called starvation. No brainer. Everyone's got it. It's not anything that we need to discuss right now. So why is it like not working? And I'll tell you why. First thing is, in the equation just means there's an equal sign. And we've all seen equals. 2 + 2 = 4. Okay, that's an equation. Equations mean that one side of the equal sign equals the other side. And when they don't, then it's two lines, the equal sign with a slash through it means not equals. So there are factors, and these factors are there are so many factors that affect this. So I like to say calories in times bunch of factors equals calories out times a bunch of factors. And if a bunch of factors makes you sit there and say, I'm confused already, that's exactly what I'm trying to get to you. That's exactly what's happening. We are faced with so many factors that confuse the issue that it is still true. Calories in equals calories out. We cannot get around that. But it's those factors that confuse things. I'll give you an example. Age. All right. Look at any youngster buried in the refrigerator, eating everything you got and still keeping lean. And then look at all of us who hit 30, 40, 50, and we get heavier and heavier, and it's harder for us to get rid of the weight. Okay. Age. Okay. Breed of the horse. I mean, you look at Shetland pony and they get fat on air. And then you look at a thoroughbred that's, we always think of thoroughbreds as youngsters, they're lean, right? So there's something called a breed and the use of the horse. So the racing horse is going to be different, or the horse that's plowing fields, the horse that's doing endurance riding is going to be completely different than the horse that's sedentary and it's just a broodmare. Then, as we discussed in the last podcast about stress, we can add stress to that. Is there not enough sleep? Are they being overworked? Are they being aggressive in the environment? Is the barn help not doing well? Are the stalls just not hygienically clean? Is there no place to lay down? Is there bad music in the barn? All these things can be stress that will alter the calories in, calories out because of the way it's used. All right. Illness, prior illnesses, chronic lamenesses, lack of exercise. And of course, we have genetics. And genetics is one of those things that is what I call a garbage pail. And we'll say, oh, it's just genetics. That's why they're that way. The Shetland is obese because of genetics. Okay, fine. We've got that. But we still have to account for it in the equation of other factors. So if the horse gets fat on air, you have to make sure that the amount of calories coming in is less, the amount of work they're doing is increased. So the fat pony's pulling a cart every day so they keep their weight down. So this pretty much sums it up. You've got a broodmare that's in the backyard doing nothing. A retired horse is going to have a completely different nutritional profile than the horse that's in competition, no matter what your competition is, and working 5-6 days a week. So I also want to go over something called entropy. And I've had a whole podcast on entropy, and I love the word entropy. And I hate entropy because entropy is basically the third law of thermodynamics. In basic terms, if no energy is applied to keep the molecules of life moving, life will cease. I mean, you're sitting there saying, wait a minute, that was too simple. Can you just repeat that? Well, yeah. The plate that doesn't, that's being spun on the top of a stick, if you don't keep spinning it, it finally wobbles and falls off because it requires energy to keep its balance. If you ride a bicycle, and you stop pedaling and you just keep coasting and coasting and coasting, at some point it falls over because nothing keeps it up anymore. If you have a house, let's put it this way. Let's say you have a barn and you have fencing. Almost all of us have it. And if nobody goes out there and maintains the barn and maintains the fencing and maintains the pastures, they will suddenly, seem sudden, rot and fall down and become nothing. I have pictures of entropy on the website where you take a look at a fence that's just been totally neglected. And this poor fence is just falling apart. I have pictures of barns that have been overgrown with vines and plants that just destroy it. And there's movies about cities that if you just let them go for thousands and thousands of years, even the cars will rust out and become just dust. That's what entropy is. And entropy means that for us to remain alive, we have to have on a moment by moment basis, not every minute, but every moment within the millisecond, within the second, within the minute, within the hours, within our lifetime. Every moment has to have energy sparking to keep the processes going. And without that, we die. I'll give you a great example. We all know that to stay alive, we need to take in air. This is how we do things. We suck in air. And if we don't suck in air for more than a minute, for a lot of us, it's lights out. Maybe you can go 2 or 3 minutes. Great. I don't know too many people who go beyond 5 minutes. They train and do deep diving. I get it. But take anybody 10 minutes and there's going to be like no life. That's how important we need to have the gases coming into our bodies being exchanged into the blood, transported in the blood to the cells and put into each cell and incorporated into a process that converts fuel into energy. Okay, so no argument, right? We all need air. Without it, we're going to die, and then we're going to turn into nothing but dust, and we're gone. You see it in plants. You guys who go out hiking, look for animals that are on the ground that are dead, and you won't find too many because they either are rotted away or they're scavenged by other animals and their pieces are gone because they're recycled. All we are materials of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen with some minerals and some nitrogen. But oxygen and nitrogen and hydrogen are all gases. So that just gets blown off and goes out into the environment. And then in the environment, it's consumed by other animals or other plants. So those molecules are constantly recirculating everywhere on the planet. And it's the carbon that gets, jettisoned and then taken back in. And everybody needs them, not just humans or horses, but the bacteria and the plants and everything else. So it's just one of those huge cycles. And I hate to go down this whole path because you might think that this is getting a little off topic, but I wanted to really emphasize that calories in times factors equals calories out times factors. And the factors include the processing of these fuels and the burning of the fuel, the processing of the food into fuels, the processing of fuels into energy, the expenditure of energy, and all the processes that are required for that, and then the rebuilding of the structures to maintain the life form, and then the continuation of the process until, for whatever reason, one of those processes stops. It could be air, it could be water, it could be lack of food, and it could be other things, disease, murder, just any of these things will stop this cycle. And we all are facing it. Sorry to bring that all up, but we have to look at this balance, energy balance, in a broad scheme, and then come back down to these other factors. So we need to bring in air, we need to consume water, then we have to consume raw materials for the species. And for horses, it's ground plants. It is not woody plants. Woody plants are consumed by ruminants. Ruminants can take woody things like branches and bark and leaves and anything that has a woody texture, and they can digest that into fuels. But horses can only take not woody, what they call cellulose. And they can take that and starches, and they can go anywhere in the world as long as they can put their face down onto something green and eat it, they'll be fine. So horses really have a unique ability to do that, but ruminants are best in class. That's why they're worldwide. And all the animals you see on the Animal Planet channel, the gazelles and the buffalo, antelope, anything that has 2 or 4 hooves on the end of each foot are ruminants, and they are worldwide and are very efficient at eating. And finally, we have to have amino acids. Now, what's really interesting about all these fuels is the only fuel we actually have to eat are amino acids. And I think I've gone over this in the past. The amino acids, if we don't eat any sugar, will be converted into sugar and used to fuel the body, because we need glucose to fuel the brain, and we need the glucose to fuel our muscles. That's so important. And everybody goes on a no sugar diet is fooling themselves because they need the sugar. That's just a fact of life. And if we need more than just sugar, then we need to use our fat. And what's really nice about fat is if we have enough fat, we can use that as a fuel so we don't have to use our muscles. But if we have fat and we can't use the fat, and we don't have, and then we have too much sugar coming in, which shuts down the use of fat due to insulin, then we will convert our muscles into, or our amino acids into sugar, and that will fuel our body. And this is why fat horses and fat people, when I say fat, I mean obese, are so hungry, because they're starving at the cell level. And I've gone over this a million times before, so you'll just have to kind of look at my other podcasts. But let's take close on this equation with other factors. So I think of it as a math problem. If you're earning, let's say, $3,000 and your expenses are $3,000, everything's equal. That's great. But what happens if your car has an expense? What happens if there's a repair bill that causes your expenses to increase by 1/3? Well, that means you have to go out and earn 1/3 more. And for a lot of people, that means you have to work harder, take a second job, or whatever. And then everything's fine. But there's an expenditure. You have to work harder to pay the bills. And that's everybody's story in life. You're all working harder to pay the bills in the barn. And I get that. But what about if you borrow money? So you put the repair bill on a credit card. So now you have the money to pay. And now the equation is good. It's your income of $3,000 plus the $900 you borrowed for the repair equals the $3,900 on the other side. So now you have an equal equation. But what if you miss the payment? Now there's an interest charge. So now we have an added stress on the left side of the equation, where not only do you have a credit card fee that has to be paid, so you still have to work harder, but you also have more of an expense on the equation side. On the left side, it's going to be a penalty. So now you have to even work harder. So the equation gets a little fuzzy. All right. So how about the flip side? Let's say some of you are very good at what you do and you have excess money and you put it in the savings account. All right. So now you have extra money in a savings account that you can draw out and pay for that bill. All right. So that's great. Now you don't have to go to the credit card. Unfortunately, there are something called taxes, and taxes on that extra earned income. If you didn't earn it, you wouldn't have to pay the taxes on it, but you earned it. And so you're paying taxes on that extra savings. And so that's a stress on the system. So let's say you earn $1,000, but it's only worth $900. So that $900 repair on your car costs you $1,000 in income and taxes. So now the equation is balanced, but it's still at a cost. And what I'm trying to get at is every time we try to balance the equation, there is a cost. Let's say you've got the money and you've got the repair bill, but then when you get there, the guy says, the repair person says, well, I found some other things and it's actually going to be $1,100 and not $900. And you're like, where am I going to get the extra $200 to pay this? Now you're going back to your credit cards or your savings account, and it just is an ever escalating process. some of these factors include inflammation. In fact, inflammation is the biggest factor. Inflammation comes from stress. If you put too much body fat, if you have too much fat in the cells, they're going to release cytokines, which is stress. If you're in a relationship or a job where you're not happy, that's going to be stress. If you're getting older and your hormones change, the processes of keeping food on the available for use gets worse, gets less available. The food that you bring in gets easily stored as body fat and harder to get rid of. All of us who get older realize that we need to mobilize that fat a little bit better. So we all go out to exercise. So we start to increase exercise on the right side of the equation, calories out. So we're exercising like crazy. We're running, we're on the treadmill, we're going to the gym, we're trying to build muscle and all of that. And to a degree, that actually helps, because the more expenditures you've got, the more of the excess calories that you've got, you'll burn through. It's just like the more problems with your car, the less your savings account. Okay, that's not a really good example. But if your savings account is body fat, well, yeah, you want to increase the cost of living so we can draw down that body fat. But just keep in mind, if we do get an ice age, those with more body fat are more likely to survive than all of us lean people who don't have the excess body fat. But still, it's the same equation. You can't get away from it. It doesn't matter what side of the a political spectrum you live on. It doesn't believe in your religions or your any other beliefs that you've got. There's nothing else that matters when it comes down to the first law of thermodynamics. Calories in equals calories out. And of course, those factors is what we're trying to deal with. So when you get these Facebook feeds that say, you can lose calories, or you can lose weight doing this, or join this club and you'll lose weight. Everyone wants to lose weight. And I keep saying, well, chop off your arm. You're going to lose 20 pounds right there. And everyone says, ha, ha, ha. I said, well, come on, you got to understand. Are you talking about losing bone, losing fat, losing muscle, losing water? You go dehydration for a day or two, and you're going to lose a lot of weight. I guarantee you. But it's really interesting, because if you start burning off body fat, you're going to lose water, because in the process of losing body fat, you're going to generate water, which is going to come out. And every molecule of glycogen, you're going to put in a molecule or two of water just to put that molecule of glycogen in the muscle. So as you burn off muscle, you're going to be burning off water as well. So if you're getting more and more confused, I get it. Now let's try and figure out what we can do about it. Because if we are trying to balance the equation for this horse, it's going to be different if we're trying to balance the equation for that horse. And every other horse in your barn is going to be different. And that's what I keep trying to emphasize. There's no one rule fits all. But yet when we go either to my podcasts or to magazines that are supporting the horse, or to nutritionists who are supporting the horse, or to anybody's idea, we don't know what's going to work for your horse. A great example is a gal just called me and said, look, I've done everything you've said. I've taken away all the grains. The horse just has pasture. I've limited his hay, and he's getting soybean meal as a protein source. And yet lice has come back, and they still are overweight. And in reality, these horses are not expending a lot of energy. They're not being worked hard at all. And yet they have 24/7 access to a pasture that's providing more sugar in the form of starch and more fat in the form of breakdown of cellulose than that horse needs in a day. So the left side of the equation of calories in is greater than the right side of the equation of calories out. Further, there's plenty of evidence that shows that if you eat too much protein, that if that protein is is not absorbed slowly, in other words, if it's absorbed quickly, there's a good chance that that protein will be converted into sugar. The amino acids will be oxidized, in other words. And this is why bodybuilders eat a lot of meat and a lot of other sources of protein, and they will combine fiber with it to slow down the absorption of protein. Now, in our horses, they're all pure vegetarians. So they're eating a lot of grass. So that's a lot of fiber. And the cellulose is acting as a prebiotic. Now, in these two horses, dumping in the soybean meal into 2 feedings should be okay, but it's a slow process given the results there. So the hair coat's looking better, the hooves are looking better, their attitudes have gotten better. You know, there's so many positive things that I just said, look, you've got another year of this before you start to see a change in their immune system. And that's what's happening at that farm for those horses. But over here, you've got no pasture. You've got no, you don't have, you just have hay, and somebody's soaking the hay. So we're removing those extra sugars. So now we have a horse that's low on sugar, yet still getting a lot of fiber and adding soybean meal, and they're getting quicker and better results. Well, that's because you're fussing with the factors on both sides, and you're altering the calories in and calories out due to those factors. Then you have horses that are stressed. They're working their tails off. They're race horses, let's say, or endurance horses. Well, they're consuming so many calories that it doesn't matter what you feed them on the left-hand side of the equation. They're going to consume and be fine. However, if some of those processed feeds are getting in there on the left side of the equation of calories in, and they're inflammatory, for instance, there are lectins in the hulls of wheat, of rice, of soybeans, of beet pulp, or beets, sugar beets, and you're feeding all these inflammatory ingredients or possibly inflammatory ingredients. I'll even include in there flaxseed and other seeds. If those inflammatory ingredients are getting in there for this particular horse, you're going to diminish the amount of food that actually gets absorbed. So calories in actually isn't doing its job, and the horse can be underweight. So now you're feeding more and more calories to this horse, and due to inflammation in the hindgut, they can't absorb it. So they're hard keepers, and yet the inflammation is outrageous, and they're going to have gastric upsets. So they put on GastroGuard or other products that will calm down the gut inflammation that's occurring in the stomach or the intestines, and they're still struggling to maintain their weight. Then you take another horse that's doing the same thing, except they're overweight. And what's the difference? Well, it could be the gut bacteria. I mean, in this equation of other things, on both sides of the equation are the gut bacteria. Because remember, when you eat food, not all the food is going right into the body, but it's going into the gut bacteria, and they are developing the food. And there's evidence now that amino acids will come into certain bacteria, and these bacteria will actually create amino acids. I mean, that's crazy. And then there's other bacteria that will take amino acids you're eating, and they will create short-chain fatty acids. And I always thought short-chain fatty acids were the acetate, propionate, and butyrate that go on and fuel the horse. But now I'm finding that they're also branch-chain amino acids like valine, leucine, and isoleucine, and they're being changed into the what do they call them? Branch-chain fatty acids, something I'd never heard of until recently. So it's way more complex than I can ever make it simplified for you guys. The message of what I'm trying to say to you is simply this. Every horse out there is living with this first law of thermodynamics, which says calories in equals calories out. It's the other factors that are multiplying the calories in and the calories out, mostly inflammation and other stresses that we have to adjust for. And I call it adjusting the dials. Now, some of you guys are too young to know that you had to tune a radio. I mean, right now, you just select the playlist that you want. You select the streaming service. There's no tuning. It's automatic. But back in the day, you would have a radio and you would tune, and you'd have to change the position of the radio or the antenna to get the best signal. And then you tune it again. There was a time where all music came in as a mono. And then suddenly some of these stations out of the big cities started broadcasting stereo. And it was so cool to actually listen to a radio and have two different channels, you know, a left and right that were different and created a much better sound. But to get that, we had to tune. And it's a concept that we forget now in automated society, where you get in the car and it goes. You don't have to tune the engine. There's no adjusting of the timing. You don't have to get the carburetor mixed just right, the air and the gas. It's all done automatically. So most of you out there don't understand the concept of adjusting for other factors. And maybe that's what I'm trying to get. Maybe the title for this podcast is tuning your horse to optimize it, because that's what you have to do. If you have more than one horse in the barn, if you have 4, 5, 6 horses in the barn, you know that every horse has to be fed differently. I don't know if my grammar is correct. Doesn't matter. But horse A needs less food, horse C needs more food, and horse E needs just a different mix than the other two. And it's up to you as a horse owner to understand that. And the whole purpose of this podcast is to say, okay, we've got 2 ways, or more than one way. Let's just put that, more than one way to feed your horses. And I'm going to suggest that we should make air and water available at all times. Okay. I'm just laughing because you guys are saying, you know, duh. Okay. But let's bring it down to what else is necessary. Well, proteins are so important and yet are completely ignored in most horse people, or if horse owners. And most horse owners, even if they do say protein, they don't understand what it is. And this is the whole thrust of what I've been doing for years, is to tell you how important protein is. But that's just one of the factors. The other is the fuels, the amount of carbohydrates, the amount of fats that the horse is going to get. And luckily, the horse is going to make the fats he needs out of the cellulose via hindgut fermentation, which makes a horse so unique. So what we've got, the problem that we got is we're feeding way too much sugar and not enough protein. And once we get that concept committed and we start to raise the amount of protein so it's at least equal to the amount of sugar, or maybe a little bit more, we're going to find these horses will change in front of our eyes to a healthier horse, stronger tendons and ligaments, stronger hooves, stronger top lines, better hair coat, better hooves, and better immune system. All these things will start to fall into position as we start to adjust the dials for each horse so that they're optimally fed. And of course, optimally, everyone would like to have a test done. Hey, doc, come in here and test my horse and then tell me what to feed it. Hasn't happened yet. We are getting there in humans. We are now looking at humans for what gut microbes are in our system and how they're being maintained, how the foods are affecting those gut microbes. Are we feeding the gut microbes correctly with correct prebiotics? What stresses are we applying to ourselves that's affecting the gut microbiome? And once we understand that, we have to look at the processes. Do we have the enzymes working correctly? Is there a gut microbiome that can be altered that will affect that? Or do we have a genetic problem where we'll never get that correct and we're always going to be that way? Tuning the dials is the most important thing. And the most important thing you do is get a diary for each horse and say, okay, We're going to focus on number one, making sure that the horse has adequate amounts of protein. And I've told you how to do that. Number two, we're going to make sure that the horse is not being overfed with glucose. And if the horse is being fed correctly for the amount of energy that horse needs, and is being satiated by the protein that you're feeding him, the horse should be calm, should not be hungry, and should be existing beautifully. And if you can get off this idea that you have to supplement your horses with supplements that are untested, that are there's no guaranteed analysis, and understand that without doing the basics, the supplements are just throwing darts at the wall and hoping you hit the dartboard, and most of you are missing. I do believe in salt. I think salt is important. I've added salt to my diet, potassium, magnesium, and sodium. And that seems to make a difference in my life. I'm adjusting my protein. I'm adjusting my gut microbiome. I'm doing that through prebiotics and postbiotics. And we'll see how it goes over the next 6 to 8 to 12 months. But I'm trying to get over what happened to me last year through radiation treatment for prostate and the anti-testosterone hormones. And if you don't know about that, that's just the thing I went through all of last year. And I'm getting back on track and getting my my mental and physical state back on track. And you're going to see this with your horses. And it may take 6 months to a year to get that ship turned around and head in the right direction, and a whole nother year to get them right. There are some diseases that once established are very hard to get rid of. For instance, equine asthma. That's very difficult to get rid of. And I've yet to see anybody have their horse turn around on asthma just through diet. But I've seen horses and insulin resistance and laminitis and Cushing's disease and obesity and behavioral issues. I mean, the number of people who are coming back to me to tell me this are inspiring. They're making it worthwhile. And this is what brings me out to my studio to make these recordings, to let you know that it's possible. But to do it, I have to start to tell you about these very basic things. These basic things that talk about thermodynamics, calories in, calories out, the third law of thermodynamics of entropy, to understand why it's necessary to get that happening all the time. Why in humans sleep is so important, and it's got to be in every other animal. Every other animal that I see has a set sleep period. Every animal, horses included, your dogs, your cats, some of them sleep, it seems like 24/7. But sleep is important because the process of cleaning up all the debris that is created in the day's event requires a ton of energy and time to clear out from the brain. There's a whole podcast on sleep that I talked about the shrinkage of the brain during the brain cycles and the glial cells coming in, the glymph, to clean things out. And if you're not doing that, you're going to have a clogged up blood-brain barrier, and the horse is not going to behave well, and you're sending the horse off for special training. And in reality, all you have to do is change your diet, give them some sleep, take away their stress, and you can have a better horse. All right. I think that's going to do it for me on this podcast. I'm trying to make them a little bit shorter so a lot of people have better times listening to these things. As always, if you like what I've got to say, please forward it, let other people know, subscribe, etc. Because you and I, we're in this mission to help horses thrive in a human world. And I need your help. And the more of you who come out there and do that, the better. So this Doc T, I appreciate you being here, and I'll talk to you next week. Thanks. Bye. Hey, everyone. Doc T here. Thank you for listening to my content. Would you do me a huge favor? Would you please subscribe, comment, like, thumbs up, and give a star review? However it's presented to you, I want you to do that.
There's two reasons. The first, of course, is to improve this product. This way I know what you like, what you don't like, what I can improve upon, what topics you want me to cover. But more importantly, it's also going to help others find me. And by doing that, you are now engaged in this mission of helping horses thrive in a human world. By you helping, we can reach others. And that I would be so grateful for. And remember, go to thehorsesadvocate.com for updates on this information. Thehorsesadvocate.com. And again, thank you so much for being here. Doc T out.